Drop it like it's hot. Our panel, Cenk, Uygur, John Iadarola, and we have Uno Mas host, Jobrani. Okay, Mas, great to see you again, brother.
Fists of marshmallow.
Well, that's why we like you, Mas. You know, you're 2 graham crackers away from s'mores. Okay, anyways, lots of interesting news today. Okay, so do we have news of corruption in American politics? Of course. Okay, is it in the Republican and Democratic parties? Of course. But Russia not just stalled, but perhaps losing in Ukraine. What is this?
New reports, Ukraine is invading Russia.
I wouldn't go that far, but by the way, you joke. But of course, Fox News will actually say that in a minute or two. But yes, the Ukrainians seems to have the Russians on the run. There is actual evidence of retreat. So that is amazing. So don't get too carried away. We'll give you the details in a second so you know the exact context. But we are going to start with Ukraine. John, take it.
We're actually starting off domestically with a bit of a scandal here, but we will be getting to Ukraine. Our whole next block is going to be about some fascinating updates on what's going on in Ukraine. But why don't we start off with this video?
Do not concede, she wrote. It takes time for the army who is gathering for his back. Thomas urged Meadows to help the president stand firm. The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history. The messages don't directly reference Justice Thomas or the Supreme Court, but show how Ginni Thomas sought to guide the president's strategy to overturn the election, urging Meadows to make Trump's controversial attorney, Sidney Powell, the lead and the face. On November 24th, Meadows wrote Thomas, quote, "This is a fight of good versus evil." Thomas replied, "Thank you, needed that. This plus a conversation with my best friend just now." It is unclear who Ginni Thomas was referring to. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas often refers to his wife this way.
I love being here with my bride, Virginia, who's a gift from God and my totally best friend in the whole world.
So we've known for a long time that Virginia Ginni Thomas, wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, is an issue, should be an even bigger issue for the Supreme Court Justice. She is a massive power broker on the right, raising money and providing it to different groups, different individuals. And we've all pretended for a long time that that's not supposed to be a conflict of interest. This is a pretty clear conflict of interest though. In the time after the 2020 election, the wife of Clarence Thomas spent those months leading up to the insurrection communicating directly with some of the most powerful people in the Trump administration and trying to assist President Trump, then President Trump, in his bid to effectively end our democracy, to cancel the results of the election and stay in power. And I want to give you a few more specifics about some of the things she was communicating with Mark Meadows specifically with. She sent him a message saying, Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators are being arrested and detained for ballot fraud right now and over coming days, and will be living in barges off Gitmo to face military tribunals for sedition. House and Senate guys are pathetic too. Only 4 GOP House members seen out in street rallies with grassroots. Where the heck are all those who benefited by president's coattails? Listen to Rush, Mark Steyn, Bongino. No, but like this is the most amazing thing. We know that there are a lot of opportunists on the right. You know, Josh Hawley raising his fist as the insurrection started, and Marjorie Greene in her speeches and all that. Now, she might be a true believer too, but people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, they did what they did, not believing there was anything to it, but because they wanted to be a Republican, and that's kind of what you need to do. Ginni Thomas is a legitimate maniac. She believes that Dan Bongino has the answers. She believed not that Biden and his whole crew should be arrested, but that they were in the process of being arrested, that within days they would be in barges off Gitmo. She was saying this not on Fox News to convince the rubes. She was texting this to Mark Meadows. She believed every word of what she was saying. She talked about having conversations with her best friend, who has to be Clarence Thomas at this point. And there is plenty of evidence that Clarence Thomas was actually listening. And all of this, we're supposed to pretend is not a big issue.
Yeah, well, I'm of two minds on this. One might surprise you, one of my points, which is that, look, is Ginni Thomas cray-cray? Of course, she's totally and utterly crazy. No, Biden and his team were not going to be rounded up and put on a barge off of Gitmo. You have to be a literal lunatic to believe that. Is Ginni Thomas a literal lunatic? Yes, but honestly, so are a lot of Republicans. They have mental issues. They are not attached to reality. How do I know? Biden and his team are not on a barge off of Gitmo, nor did they even stand 1% chance of that happening. That's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Now, so that's my opinion on that is not surprising. It's fact-based. If you don't agree with that, you're also detached from reality, okay? They're not off of Gitmo. Nobody got rounded up into FEMA camps. You guys have never been right about a single thing. Trump didn't get reinstated. We can go on and on, right? So, but the part where I diverge from mainstream media and many others is like they're always shocked that Ginni Thomas is crazy. They're like, there's like story after story, like, oh, did you know she thinks this? Yeah, she's a lunatic, so what, right? Like, so why are they shocked? Because they're shocked that it's someone in the elites, someone that they know. They're like, a Supreme Court justice's wife is crazy? Look, newsflash, like a quarter of the country is crazy. Republicans have lost their minds. Trump lost 60 court cases in a row. Every judge, including every Trump-appointed judge, said there's not a shred of evidence that the election was stolen. Yet, at least 25% of the country believes unquestioningly that it was stolen. They are completely detached from reality, the definition of being crazy. So I'm not at all surprised that Ginni Thomas is crazy. In fact, I'm kind of annoyed that they write 20 different articles about the same thing as if it's like some shocking event, right? Get it through your thick skulls. Republicans have lost touch with reality. So Clarence Thomas, is he crazy? Come on, guys. Of course he is. Oh, but he's a Supreme Court justice. The reason why people in mainstream media are like outraged by it is because they still believe in the mythology of great men. Like, oh, people who are on the Supreme Court and our institutions are great men. No, they're not. He's an idiot. He was put on there by Republicans to be an idiot, okay? And the other day he had the audacity to do a speech about they shouldn't politicize the Supreme Court. Every single one of his decisions has been based on either politics or religion. There is no consistent judicial philosophy other than the right wing is always right, okay? He's a joke. Both him and his wife have IQ near single digits, okay? So none of that is surprising. But here we actually have a story. The story is, wait a minute, Justice Thomas is ruling on January 6 issues and about hiding evidence. He did not want Trump to turn over evidence on January 6. Well, some of that evidence is literally about his wife. No, you gotta recuse yourself. Are there no bounds to your corruption, Clarence Thomas? And the obvious answer is no, there aren't. In a sane world, he would obviously be impeached if he continued to not recuse himself on January 6 cases where his wife is deeply involved in the plot. That's so obvious. There's another really important legal wrinkle to this in a minute, but I want to let Maz jump in.
Well, basically, what we right now, the right wing is come down to you're either a religious nut job or you're an open grifter. So you're either Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTG, or you're DJT, Donald John Trump, or whatever his middle name is. But this Ginni Thomas falls definitely into, as you guys have been saying, a true believer. And the problem becomes when these people start to believe that there is a religious thing and that Donald Trump is the calling. Like some of the messages that you see between her and Meadows are invoking Jesus, and it's just so crazy. And it reminds me, being someone who was born in Iran, and I saw the cult of personality and how the Ayatollah Khomeini was, for a lot of people, the savior Donald J. Trump is the Ayatollah Khomeini of Republicans. That's basically what it is. And Ginni Thomas is one of these people who falls into this. I just did a little bit of research about her. She was in a cult. She was in LifeSpring, and she got out of the cult, and then she did work to work against people, against cults. And now she's found her way back into a cult. So it's crazy, it's nuts. And the irony of this, the craziest part of it is she's not married to a senator who's Republican or a Congress member. She's married to a Supreme Court justice whose number one whole definition is that they're supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be neutral. We've been seeing these in the hearings this past week when Ketanji Brown Jackson has been saying, I would look at the case and make a decision. This guy's supposed to be neutral, and she's at home running this coup d'etat from the other room. It's at what? There's no point. Like, you would think she would have some level of, you know what? I'm not going to talk to you at all. Because we see it like Kellyanne Conway and George Conway, right? We know that family doesn't get along, right? But this is a Supreme Court justice. At what, doesn't he at least have a moment where he goes, listen, woman, keep your thoughts to yourself. You can't go to the rally. The only reason she left the rally is because she said it was cold. She didn't leave the rally because it was a bunch of crazy people that were about to attack she goes, it got cold, I couldn't stand that shows that she's not only crazy, she's weak. She didn't have the courage to storm the Capitol. So if I were one of the stormers, I'd be even more upset. I'd be like, really, Ginni, you left when it got cold?
Yeah.
So she's got problems all over the place, and what's crazy is we're a year and plus past it, and these people are still able to be in positions of power. The fact that, again, looking at Ginni Thomas, she originally supported Ted Cruz. That should tell you a lot. She supported Ted Cruz. To say, who supports Ted Cruz? You got to be really crazy. Yeah, his exec. So it's mind blowing that I still am holding out, but I'm losing hope more and more that the January 6th committee is going to go after some of these people and legally, like you said, either somebody like Thomas should be impeached. He shouldn't be there anymore. Cruz, Hawley, all these people that were involved need to be impeached from their positions. And here we are sitting, listening to every time more evidence comes out. We're just like, of course we knew this.
Yeah.
So what's next? What are the consequences?
Maz, I was very surprised about that thing about the cold. I didn't know that, and it worries me because with the state of climate change, our last defense against insurrections might be evaporating every year. But anyway, I would just go a little bit further. So you had said previously he should be impeached if he doesn't recuse himself. The thing is, like, even if we're forgetting all the other issues with his wife being involved with all the moving of money on the right and everything, he's already had multiple opportunities and he chose not to, as we'll get to. So back in February of last year, when the Supreme Court rejected election challenges filed by Trump and his allies, Thomas wrote in a dissent that it was baffling and inexplicable that the majority had decided against hearing the cases because he believed the Supreme Court should provide states with guidance for future elections. Okay, he's wording that in a way that sounds kind of reasonable, but what he's saying is that they should legitimize these challenges that judges have already dismissed, implying in doing so that those judges made a mistake. They should take it up. And he says that's the reason, but what if his real explanation, real rationale, is that he wants to rule in favor of the Trump administration? What about just earlier, when the court rebuffed Trump's bid to block the release of documents related to January 6th? It was an 8-1 decision. All the other Republicans, 3 justices that were put there by Trump ruled against him. But Clarence Thomas said, no, he shouldn't have to give that information. He's had 2 chances. That's not 3 strikes, but we're not playing sports. This is the Supreme Court. I think that's enough. They're not gonna do anything. They'd never take him out, even though imagine if you found out that if Ketanji Brown Jackson had been sending text messages to the leaders of BLM or something like that, how the right would say, it would be a totally different standard. But this guy has already burned through whatever chances I think it's reasonable for him to have.
Yeah, so of course the problem is there's nothing we could do, right? The Republicans are gonna block all impeachment. There's no way in the world the Republicans would impeach Clarence Thomas. 0 on top of 0%, right? It doesn't matter. He could publicly try to kill a Democrat and they wouldn't impeach him. But look, on January 6th, they literally tried to murder Democrats.
Yeah.
That's literally what happened on January 6th, let alone the Republican vice president, right? And still, there's no impeachment, no nothing. And he's like, oh yeah, my wife was part of the plot. I don't care. I'm not guilty. It's absurd. It's beyond absurd. Part of the problem is that we normalize it. It is not normal. She was part of a coup attempt, and her husband's on the Supreme Court ruling in her favor. It's insanity. And remember, guys, it was 8-1. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, the Handmaid's Tale lady, they all said, no, you got to give the evidence over to the House, right? Clarence Thomas was like, no, you don't. That evidence is going to implicate my wife. No, I'm not going to recuse myself. He has no morals, no principles. It's just gross. And so there's one person on the Supreme Court that is clearly massively corrupt. Ron Wyden, a Democratic senator, is calling for him to resign. He's not gonna resign. Have you ever met a Republican, right? So, I mean, Wyden's not doing the wrong thing by bringing attention to it, but we just know that it's not fixable, unfortunately, in this current state. But I wanted to come back to one other really important point. Ginni Thomas wanted the Democrats to be tried by a military tribunal. That's not just nuts. That is saying, get rid of democracy. Let's go to a dictatorship, a military dictatorship led by our dear leader, Donald Trump. And my husband's on the Supreme Court and he'll sanction it. My best friend. So we have at least one clear fascist on the Supreme Court who says, military tribunals for our political opponents sounds pretty good. She talked to her best friend. So, I mean, we're getting to late stage fascism here. There's more stories about that later in the show. But as serious as that is, it is impossible not to point out how funny Maz's point was. That she's like, this is so important and existential, we're gonna lose the country. Oh, it's a little chilly. I gotta go inside.
She took off. I mean, who would have known that all it would have taken, one more jacket and the coup might have happened. One more layer of clothes. If she had thermals underneath, it might have happened. Could you imagine Ginni Thomas? Like, I got my pets. It's just crazy, man.
Who are the only
people?
people?
One thing I will note, going back to this whole thing of like the nut job religious types, the reason obviously they have all of their beliefs, whether it's with abortion or gay marriage or all this other stuff. I think that's why they're so passionate in their support of someone who is clearly such a unmoral human being, Donald Trump. But they feel that for whatever reason, he's their savior. And it does remind me again of these totalitarian states, whether it's Iran or other places that had that cult of personality and said, this guy, I alone can fix it. And so when they go that crazy, you're dealing with crazy. And unfortunately in that household, crazy is living with another crazy. Like she needs her own George Conway to maybe counter her points, but that's not gonna happen.
Instead we got crazy squared.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it's time to take our first break. When we come back, though, we're gonna be giving you updates on what's going on in Ukraine, including some pretty surprising developments on the military front, all that and more after this.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, John, and Maz with you guys. John's got a lot more news.
I do, but we're gonna launch it with this.
Have you gathered specific intelligence that suggests that President Putin is deploying these weapons, moving them to position, or considering their use? And would the US or NATO respond with military action if he did use chemical weapons?
On the first question, I can't answer that. I'm not going to give you intelligence data, number one. Number two, we would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
And so that's a little bit vague there, asked specifically about the use of chemical weapons, which thankfully, despite several weeks of whisperings about, we haven't seen any proof that anyone has used any chemical weapons. But he does go on to say to another reporter, it would trigger a response in kind, whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross we'd make that decision at the time. So it's a bit jumbled in terms of what he's saying. But the reason that I want to focus on this is because we try to be fair here at the Young Turks. We are incredibly critical and have been for 2 decades now of warmongering politicians, which is why we've given credit to Joe Biden and his administration thus far in helping to try to tamp down the tensions in terms of any sort of direct provocation or direct conflict with Russia. But that means we also have to be on the lookout when they start to say things that hint in that direction. So the idea that we would respond in kind to the use of chemical weapons, I have to assume he doesn't mean what he seems to be meaning, because he certainly couldn't be implying we would then use chemical weapons. But if he's even implying any sort of direct military intervention, then that is exactly the sort of disastrous red line that we've been warning against from the very beginning.
Yeah, so look, that was a Bidenism, the in-kind line. A Bidenism being a jumbled mess that's hard to tell because he's muttering and it's not quite sure, you're not quite sure what he's saying, right? So there's 2 possibilities. One is beyond disastrous and the other one is just awful, okay? So beyond disastrous is in kind, they use chemical weapons, we use chemical weapons. He can't possibly mean that, that's nuts, right? So I'm gonna eliminate that as a possibility because I don't think he's lost his mind, because as John pointed out, look, we've criticized him 2,000 times. I think his domestic policy is a disaster, but so far he's handled this in a way that is borderline excellent, finding a balance between crippling economic sanctions while not engaging militarily, right? So he can't possibly mean that we would respond with chemical or biological weapons. Okay, now, if he does, by the way, then overwhelming criticism, it's abhorrent and unacceptable. But the second option is not a very good one, where he seemed to be indicating military engagement. Military engagement of any sort is a massive problem that risks war with Russia. And look, Russia is now apparently losing to the Ukrainian army. So that doesn't mean it would be easy for us, but all that is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the nukes when it comes to the stability and honestly the lives of everyone on the planet. So we cannot engage militarily. So I hope he walks that back. That's a very bad idea. I know he's trying to deter them from using chemical weapons, and I appreciate that. But on the other hand, any talk of red line when you're talking about Russia or nuclear power is insanity. It's driven by neoconservatives like Lindsey Graham, who can't wait to mine the meteor. And just before we all die of World War III, he made a couple more bucks from his defense contractor donors, right? So hell no on any red line. There's no red line here. That talk is insane, Maz.
You know, it's such a frustrating situation. First of all, I have a hard time believing out of 7 billion people in the world, the one guy we get to lead this country is this Putin. I'm talking about Putin. Is this crazy POS? There's 7 billion people out there. There could have been one guy who might have had some level of critical thinking and might have thought, okay, let me really think this thing out. But this guy's ego, like he is Trump on steroids in many ways. His ego is such an ego, and we're stuck in this situation. As you said, it's such a tough situation. Because I've talked to people who are analysts, and they've said, look, if you don't do something now, if you don't protect the skies now, if you don't get involved now, you're going to be having the same conversation in a month, 2 months, 3 months as he gets further and further, and who knows what he's going to do next. What's frustrating to me is this is Rocky 4. I thought Rocky 4 was over. I thought we're already in Rocky 8. The whole Ivan Drago, I will break you. We are there now, and we don't know what to do. And we need this moment of like, we need Gorbachev, we need somebody. I don't know what's gonna happen, because as you said, Cenk, I'm totally opposed to war, but I don't know what we do. What if they do use chemical weapons? The problem has been in the past, we've appeased this guy, this nut job, over and over and over again. And he, to Crimea, Syria, you name it. There's been many times where we've appeased him. And again, I'm not a proponent of fighting with weapons, and I love the fact that you said that we're doing these economic sanctions, but I'm at a loss, and I'm at a loss as to what Biden would have to say. I agree with both of you guys. I think they've done a good job so far. I think they've done a great job of putting out a lot of their intelligence to go, we know they're going to be doing this, and then Russia does it, and they go, there you go. So it's almost like they're telling us what's going to happen, and then it happens, and it's happening the way that they're telling us it's going to happen. The one thing I will say is somebody had a tweet out there which was great. They said it's great to see our president meeting with the leaders of NATO and not pushing them out of the way. And it reminded me of that moment when Trump pushed the guy of Montenegro, of all the places, the one guy who's like in the smallest country, is like, get out of my way. It's so nice to see a leader and his team. Like, it made me realize I'm so happy not to have to watch Kellyanne Conway and Kayleigh McEnany and Stephen Miller, all those. I'm so happy not to have to see those guys. We get to watch Jen Psaki talk. I just love that. So yes, I agree with you, Cenk. A little bit of mumbo jumbo, a little bit of Bidenisms, but at the same time, I'll take a Bidenism any day over a half a second of Trump pushing people out of the way for, just, oh God, I'm so happy.
Well, and look, we do have a little bit of clear Biden communication in a video in 1 sec, but you had asked about what else is being done. Well, at this meeting, Biden says he supports expelling Russia from the G20. He also talked about their continued efforts to try to keep China out of the conflict, and also says that one of the reasons he wanted to go in person to meet with the heads of NATO is to make sure that not only do they have this suite of sanctions, but that they will maintain it on for months, a year, if that's what it takes to get Putin to finally, go to the table and figure out how to end this thing. Also including figuring out how to set up a system to review violations of the sanctions and where, when, and how Russia is able to buy banned products. But that said, we're having this conversation about fears of Biden sort of violating what seems like a pretty ironclad, I'm not gonna do anything that's gonna lead to a direct shooting war with Russia. That said, some in the media don't seem to like that he's been that clear, as you'll see with this ABC reporter talking to Biden.
Sir, you've made it very clear in this conflict that you do not want to see World War III. But is it possible that in expressing that so early that you were too quick to rule out direct military intervention in this war? Could Putin have been emboldened knowing that you are not going to get involved directly in this conflict?
No and no.
Well, that was good. That was clear, at least. No and no. But I love you say that you don't want World War III, but that's no, but it's World War III. That's the bad one, actually. They've gotten worse. Each of the sequels, it's usually how it works. 3 is gonna be a real doozy, ABC.
Yeah. No, the media has been on the push for war has been just nuts. I mean, don't look up type of nuts. So what kind of question? I mean, John's exactly right. There is no sentence that ends rationally that starts with, you say you're against World War III, but. No, there's no but. No, I mean, you say you're against all of us dying, but on the other hand, we could mine the meteor and make $4 trillion before we all die. War is really good for ratings on television. Did you know that, President Biden, right? No, you lunatics. No, we cannot have war with Russia. And right now they appear to be losing. I mean, Putin is going out there to are the economic sanctions working? Is Biden's plan working? Guys, when Biden's plan is not working, like voting rights, $15 minimum wage, you turn into here and we tell you, it is not working. Okay, everybody telling you that it's working is lying, right? In this case, it's definitely working. Putin's speeches have devolved to, okay, maybe both our legs are broken, but I think we could still wheel around here, right? Like when he talks about the Russian economy, he's like almost crying. He's like, I know, we're completely devastated. No one has food, we're all destroyed. But hang in there, guys, hang in there, okay? So it's getting worse and worse. The sanctions are definitely working. He doesn't care about the average Russian at all, but he cares about the average Russian oligarch, and they're hurt, dog. Don't ask them if they're all right. And to that point, our one defense against chemical, biological, and maybe tactical nukes that Russia might use is that if they go that far, it is then possible that they would also lose China. And China would come to our side, and that Europe would then say, I don't care if gas is 50 cents more or $5 more. They just nuked a part of Europe. We're cutting off their oil as well, in which case Russia would have no money left. And at that point, it's a matter of time before someone makes a move or 12 moves against Putin internally, because you cannot cost people that much money without some sort of consequences internally.
You know, it's funny. It's almost like they're losing their sponsors. It's kind of like capitalism has won. Capitalism has won when you can unsponsor the country. So like I can imagine Putin doing a speech and going like, this speech brought to you by Coca-Cola, and then someone moves the Coca-Cola, they go, no, oh, Kremlin Cola, try Kremlin Cola. It's like Coca-Cola, but it's from Kremlin. This brought to you by McDonald's, McYuri's. Okay, fine, McYuri's. But my point is, these companies are pulling out. First of all, when Coca-Cola and McDonald's pulled out, my first thought was, wait a minute, we're trying to punish them. We just made them healthier. We pulled out we should be pushing more like American junk food. We should be like Doritos should be like stepping up their game. But here's what's interesting, because you were talking about, Cenk, like what's it gonna take for other countries and other places to really, really sanction them completely? Because there's companies that haven't pulled out. Like I read somewhere, and I don't know if this has happened since, but I read somewhere that Burger King franchises weren't pulling out. The Koch brothers, I read, weren't pulling out their companies. I mean, how evil do you have to be where you're like, nah, we're good. We'll keep sponsoring the war. We're the Koch brothers. So it would be great if in a world where we really could just all like just turn a switch and it's just full on sanction to the point where there's no denial. Because I keep hearing these reports of when are the Russian people going to start to see what's really happening and turn against him. And I think as body bags start coming home, as the sanctions start taking effect, we really hopefully can avoid having to escalate this war. I mean, that's the hope, that's the hope. I mean, they just found his ship. I guess there's a ship off of Italy. They're trying to figure out if it's Putin's. It's worth $750 million. And they said they started looking at the list of the people who work on it, because it's never registered to him. Like any other criminal, he never registers anything in his own name. It's always in other people's names. And they were like looking at the names of the people, and it's like everyone working on the cure on the boat is Russian. And I was waiting for them to be like, it was like, Putin Jr. or whatever. But it's clearly his boat. So like, how many boats do we have to take away for this guy to really stop doing what he's doing? I don't know. And I really do hope that it doesn't have to lead to us having to escalate this war into, as you said, World War III.
Yeah, two quick points off of what Ma said. One, who's that evil? Charles Koch. That's your direct answer. Koch Industries, we did a story about it earlier, very clearly saying they will not pull out of Russia because they think it's helpful to stay in Russia to put pressure on internally. Oh, shut up, you monsters, okay? There's not a dime that Charles Koch will turn away. It doesn't matter if the entire planet is in danger. I mean, he puts the entire planet in danger through his fossil fuel investments, and it's a huge part of his company anyway. He's like, I'm in the planet killing business, so this is no skin off his ass. I mean, he's like 120 years old anyway. And so yes, there are monsters like that amongst our population. But Maz's point about capitalism is a very important one. Funny enough, BlackRock's CEO said this might signal the end of globalization. If you don't know BlackRock, it's one of the largest it's one of the largest financial institutions in the country. In other words, the bankers, okay? And he's saying, well, if we all separate and we sanction Russia and they're isolated, well, then we're not a global economy anymore. Which made me think, I wonder if BlackRock has Russian money hidden, right? Because a lot of those private equity companies hide money for oligarchs all across the world. Okay, but anyway, putting that aside, that's just speculation. I think he's exactly wrong and that Maz is right. So Maz, I think you're smarter than the top banker in the world, okay? Because
thank you.
Because I think that when you cut off Russia from the rest of global capitalism, they're hurt. They're hurt so bad, they're now partly retreating away from Kyiv. That's partly a military issue, but partly they've run out of funds, they've run out of supplies. Their troops are beginning to starve. Their internal population is in a disastrous shape. If you get cut off from the rest of the world financially, that is potentially a massive deterrence going forward. We are not just deterred by nukes anymore, but we're deterred by the world uniting on financial sanctions. That might not be such a bad thing.
Weapons of economic mass destruction. The only thing, of course, you'd have to add to that is, especially in countries that don't have a functioning democracy and haven't for decades, there has to be considerations for, well, what if they just don't back off and the devastation is being felt, but it's mainly being felt by regular people because Putin can fall back on the hundreds of billions of dollars he's stolen from Russia.
John, I just got to address that real quick. We've talked about it before. Sanctions with a dictator never work. He just, like Kim Jong-un, you could sanction him till the cows come home. He murders his own civilians on the regular. That doesn't affect him 1%. But when you have a country that has a more diversified and larger elite base, like South Africa and Russia, sanctions do work because the rest of the elites say, I'm tired of losing money. So they then put pressure in the form of either political pressure or at some point lead pressure on the leader, and things get resolved in that way. So it is what it is.
Okay, we got to go to our second break. We do have more to talk about though to close out the hour, so don't go anywhere.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, John, and Maz with you guys. Also, Naughty Grandma, who wrote in on Twitch, happy anniversary, TYT. I still love you after 15 months together. I didn't even like my husband after that long.
Oh my God. Well, poor naughty husband.
TYT, outclassing husbands since 2002. As we all say while being husbands. Okay. All right, John, forward.
Okay, let's talk about some exciting news. Ukraine spent basically the first week of the Russian invasion slowing the Russian advance. And then we had a couple of weeks of them settling into what became seemingly a quagmire for Russia. Their attempts to take over cities like Kyiv were going nowhere. Their massive convoy of armored vehicles simply dispersed into the woods, the portions that weren't destroyed. And now there's actually evidence that some of the territory that Russia had taken is being retaken by Ukraine, according to the UK. We'll get to that in a second, but first the specifics. The town of Makariv, west of the capital in Kyiv, is now back under Ukrainian control. They said that the state flag of Ukraine was raised over the city. It's part of the fiercely contested suburban areas around Kyiv where Russia made large early advances but then started to suffer problems. And according to the UK Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian counterattacks and Russian forces falling back on overextended supply lines has allowed Ukraine to reoccupy towns and defensive positions up to 35 kilometers east of Kyiv. And they believe that that is likely to continue at this point. And by the way, there seems to be somewhat of an admission of this changing situation on the Russian side, with the defense ministry official Sergei Rudskoy saying just earlier today that the main goal of the Russian operation is, quote, the liberation of Donbas, which admittedly is what they pretended it was going to be initially, but it is clear from what they were doing in their first few weeks that their intent was to destroy the military capability of Ukraine entirely and take over as many major cities as they can. If they're now communicating that they are focusing once again on just the eastern portion, that could be a tacit admission of increased Ukrainian abilities and resolve.
Guys, this is an amazing story. Look, when Russia stalled while doing that 40-mile line of tanks headed toward Kyiv, first of all, they were headed towards Kyiv and they got to 12 miles outside of Kyiv and they were in their clear intent was to circle Kyiv, the capital. They're nowhere near what the Russian minister was talking about, which is in eastern Ukraine. So there's no question he's lying about their original intent. But when they stalled, we were like, whoa. That is unexpected, right? And then, so it was unexpected by us, and it was more importantly unexpected by Putin. Putin thought that they would be able to take Kyiv and the entire country in 2 to 3 days. I don't think even Cheney believed it when he said that we would be greeted as liberators in Iraq and they would throw roses at our feet. I think he was just trolling, right? And it was so easy to get the mainstream media to go, oh yes, of course, Iraqis will love when we drop bombs on their heads. And that was clear propaganda. In Putin's case, it appears to be Propaganda Plus, a new streaming service. So it was Propaganda Plus. He actually believed it. And so they didn't adequately prepare. So one, the Ukrainians did an unbelievable job of fighting, unbelievable job. And I mean, there's historic resistance, right? But number two, the Russians had not prepared. So now there is real evidence, not just propaganda, because the Ukrainians also do propaganda, and they're actually really, really good at marketing. They've been great at that as well as military resistance. So I look out for, it's just the Ukrainian government saying it, I'm like, grain of salt, a little Salt Bay on that one. I love the Ukrainians, but of course in the middle of a war, they're gonna do marketing / propaganda, right?
Yeah.
But now there's actually heat mapping showing where the conflicts are, where they're actually firing back and forth. There's other external evidence showing the Russians are in retreat. They were 12 miles outside of Kyiv. They're now 20 miles outside of Kyiv. They're going backwards. And there are reports that the Ukrainians have now surrounded, the Russians are supposed to surround the city, but Ukrainians have beat them back so much, they have now surrounded 10,000 Russian troops. Now, again, this now gets into borderline marketing, we'll call it that. So it's impossible to know in the fog of war, but at least there's talk of mass Russian surrenders of thousands of soldiers. So if that happens, so then either Russia's gonna fully retreat and say, yeah, we meant just to take another province in eastern Ukraine, right? As they're indicating now, or Putin's gonna lose his mind and things are gonna get worse, right? But holy cow, the Ukrainians aren't just holding down the fort. They appear to be actually winning the war against Russia. Unbelievable.
Well, they're both tough people. Like we know Russians are tough, and we know Ukrainians are tough. I used to actually go to this boxing gym called Wild Card in Hollywood, just to exit. I never got in the actual ring to even with the headgear, this nose was not made for boxing because it's just a great target. But one time when I was in there, this is where Freddie Roach trains Manny Pacquiao. It's like a real pros come in. And one of the Klitschko's was in there training. And when he would hit the heavy bag, the whole building would shake. I watched this guy and I go, if this guy even got close, I would die. So Ukrainians are tough people, but Russians are tough too. And what we're finding out here is with the arms that we've given them, the West has given them a lot of military aid and military support. I think that that our equipment is definitely something that's really helping here. It reminds me of when the Taliban took back Afghanistan again, and they were sitting there in American tanks and stuff, and I was like, oh no, here we go. It's we've armed them and they're able to fight, and also it's their country, by the way. If any country's gonna learn that, was America with Vietnam. We were there for several years and didn't win anything. We left, and so similarly, anytime you try to take over a country like this, I mean, Ukraine is like a country of 40 million people. It's a big country, and what's a shame, what's heartbreaking at the end is that these guys are neighbors, and there's a lot of Russian Ukrainians, and this just shouldn't be happening, and yet it is, and it's heartbreaking. But again, in a weird, sick way, I think we all get caught up in we're okay, now I'm rooting for the Ukrainians to kill the Russians, but I'm I don't want the Russians to die either. I really would just like Vladimir Putin to disappear somehow, and maybe some open-minded leader would come in and go, all right, let's find a way to exist together. But who am I? I don't know. I'm in Vancouver where weed is legal, so maybe I'm high. I don't know.
That does sound pretty good.
Yeah,
both the legal weed and that, but
100%. So super quick, Vitaly Klitschko, by the way, is the mayor of Kyiv. So that hitting that bag is a lot like the Russian army right now. It's shaking, right? And I just want to say on the toughness, the Russian people are super tough, but when your supply lines are cut, you're gonna starve. And there's no toughness out of starvation.
Yeah.
So those troops, if those reports are accurate or anywhere near accurate, those Russian troops are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and we will have to wait and see, as you said, and we have said 1,000 times during this conflict, grains of salt on literally every piece of information coming out of there. And also, devil's advocate, a retreat can mean many things. It could be a retreat. It could be that they really do think that they can accomplish more taking over fully the eastern regions and then potentially using that as a staging ground for a reinvasion. It could be that they initially sent in logistical support for a conflict that could last 1 week, and it might have been sufficient for that. So it might be that they can retreat, actually send the additional reinforcements necessary as well as additional logistical support, and then go back in. This can mean a lot of different things, so don't get too excited, but take good news when it comes, including this good news. If we could jump ahead a little bit. According to the Ukrainian government, there has been a prisoner exchange, and the guards from Snake Island, they're saying, have actually been freed, in addition to a number of Russian soldiers and Russian civilian sailors, which were transferred back to Russia. Now, initial reports had said there was a prisoner exchange of soldiers, but they couldn't confirm that they were the actual ones from that viral story. Since then, they have said it is actually the same people. I say grains of salt anyway, but it is good news that they were able to get their people back and that Russia was able to get their people back.
That is fantastic news. Those guys are heroes.
Exactly. Well, we are running very low on time, so let's jump into our last big story. An executive at a company that owns a number of different franchises of Applebee's sent an email identifying a silver lining to the fact that gas prices are so high. But unfortunately for that CEO, the email has been leaked. Thankfully by the Reddit forum Anti-Work, which we've talked about many times on the Young Turks. And in this is Wayne Pankratz, whose LinkedIn page describes him as the executive director of operations for Apple Central LLC, sent an email back on March 9th, so very recently, titled, "Why Gas Increase is Good for Hiring." And in it, he suggested that skyrocketing gas prices will, quote, increase application flow and has the potential to lower our average wage. So hey, good news. Goes on to say, most of our employee base and potential employees base live paycheck to paycheck. Any increase in gas prices cuts into their disposable income. As inflation continues to climb and gas prices continue to go up, that means more hours employees will need to work to maintain their current level of living. Now, this is not him expressing empathy. He thinks this is an opportunity. His email goes on to claim that the company is, quote, no longer competing with the government when it comes to hiring due to the end of COVID unemployment and stimulus checks, both of which expired last year, and says that, quote, benefits us as prices rise. People who are relying on unemployment money simply will have less money to spend. It will force people back into the workforce. And in particular, into a workforce that this company will now have more control over, saying, we all competed to hire out the limited applicant pool and there was a wage war. We all saw businesses hiring team members at $18 to $20 an hour. They will no longer be able to do this. Trucking is the backbone of America, and as fuel costs rise, so will the charges for shipping. If those costs cannot be passed on to the customer in terms of menu price, the only area they can cut sizable costs will be in labor. And so, since the government has abandoned everyone, despite the fact that the pandemic continues and we're still losing close to 1,000 people a day, they're gonna be desperate. And so they're gonna come and apply, and we won't have to pay them particularly well. We gotta cut money somewhere, and that's the only thing that a well-paid executive can think of. So they're gonna be desperate, and we're gonna put the squeeze on them. So high inflation, high gas prices, bad for most people, but for some, it's an opportunity.
So this is what late stage capitalism looks like. If you haven't heard that term, this is what it means. Where things have gotten so crazy that we've lost sight of what our economy was supposed to do, right? The advocates of out of control, unregulated capitalism was that, oh, no, it's okay because it'll lead to rising wages and a better economy, and it'll trickle down on you all over your head, and then that will lift all of your boats, etc. That's not what's happening at all. What's happening instead is executives are saying, well, hey, bad economic news is good news for us because we'll be able to further brutalize our workers. They'll be more desperate, that way we can cut their wages. Gas prices are higher so we can cut their wages. So they'll be less able to afford those gas prices. That will make them even more desperate, and they'll need us even more. And then we'll really have them. And look at the options that he considers. He's like, well, I mean, we could pass it on to the customers, or we could pass it on to the employees. Never is it discussed that maybe we could cut into our profits a smidge. It's not like Applebee's is losing money. They're still making tons and tons of not just revenue, but profit. But it never even occurs to them, hey, maybe we can cut it, not get rid of our profit, but in tough times, cut into our profit. Nope, doesn't even occur to them. They're just like, who do we punish? Because it ain't us. It ain't us executives, that's for sure. Now, to that point, you'll see, it's not just some rando executive at Applebee's. You'll see all over cable news, people saying, anchors saying, to pay prices, wages are too high, it's causing inflation. Stephanie Rule said it, I can name MSNBC, forget CNN, forget Fox News, I can name you half a dozen MSNBC anchors, okay? That it's the wages that are driving up inflation. You wanna know what the reality is? Inflation is up 7%, average wages for the average American worker is up 2%, less than inflation. Now, except there is one category of workers where the wages are up more than 7%. You're gonna be shocked to find out it's bankers. And not just their salaries, their bonuses are up 20%. Show me one cable news segment where they complained about banker bonuses and how it was driving inflation. You won't find it because the people on television are the elites and they're doing marketing for other elites. And so they're lying through their teeth when they're blaming you for inflation. You know who makes a decision to raise prices? Companies do. That is a rule of physics. It's a rule of logic. It's a rule of math. There is no argument with it. Jesus doesn't raise the prices. Santa doesn't raise the prices. It is literally a corporate executive that says, because of economic conditions, raise prices. He could choose to say, no, instead of making 15% profit, let's make 11% profit. But they choose not to do that. Does anyone on television tell you that? No, they tell you the opposite. It's just a more sophisticated way of lying to you. But I gotta give you one last fact about those bonuses and how much Wall Street's getting. You guys have been, for the last 40 years, you've barely gotten any raises when you take inflation into account. Since 1985, banker bonuses have gone up 1,743%. If minimum wage had gone up at the same rate, would it be $15? Would it be 20? No, 20's outrageous.
About right? $23, right?
It would be $61.75. That's what minimum wage would be. It would be $61 if it had gone up at the same rate as the bankers. Did anybody on TV ever tell you that? Never, right? Isn't that curious how they leave out that piece of information? Moss.
First of all, Cenk, now you make me want to be a banker. I'm gonna go find a Wells Fargo and apply as soon as this episode's over. But secondly, who is this guy writing this email to? Like, even if you have these evil, crushing the worker ideas, is he sending it to Gordon Gekko? Who's he sending it to? This is like a greed is good speech that this guy wrote, and he's like, let me put it out there, not thinking, other people are gonna put it. Sometimes these executives, I really feel like they can afford to, they should have a common sense advisor, just a common sense advisor. And the guy should go, hey, I'm thinking of typing this email where I talk about crushing the little people, and I'm thinking of sending it out to a bunch of people. Do you think it's a good idea? And the common sense guy goes, yeah, don't put it in writing. Don't put it in writing. Tell your other buddy at the golf game while you smoke a cigar, make sure he's not recording it, and move on with your life. But this executives are a-holes. Someone should take the Applebee logo and change it to A-hole-bee just for this. I want to see some A-hole-bee photoshopped logos just for this guy, and it should go with a quote of his, and they should make that should be a meme for it. Let's just get it going a little bit. I think that's what should happen. So that's my 2 cents, and I'm not getting a job at a bank.
Yeah, and Maz, first of all, who's he writing it to? Other executives to tell him, remember, cut everybody's wages. That's who he's writing it to. Applebee's, of course, had an official announcement saying, Oh, I don't know why he wrote that. I mean, that's outrageous, and of course does not represent our company position, which to me was, I translated that to human speak, and it was, why did he write it down? Right? He shouldn't have written it down. We all knew to cut their wages, okay? So I just have a simpler online viral idea than Maz's. I like Maz's, but mine is just hashtag Applebee sucks. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. By the way, it's food sucks too. Maz and I talked about that in an old school episode. I love chain restaurants, the food in chain restaurants, except Applebee's. How do you screw up classic American chain restaurant? They found a way. They probably cut costs on that as well. All the money goes to the executives. None of it goes to the food or the workers. All right, we are massively out of time. All right, everybody check out Maz Jobrani everywhere he is. Maz, what's a good website for people to find your stuff?
Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. It's at Maz Jobrani on TikTok. My schedule for my touring is at mazjobrani.com, and my podcast is Back to School with Maz Jobrani. I've monopolized Maz Jobrani.
It's good thinking. Good thinking. This guy's smart, okay? John, on the other hand, has monopolized every dragon on the planet. So that's also a good thing. Okay, so damage report, obviously led by Dragon Daddy over there. Check that out. All right, the return of the Vig, Emma Vigeland, when we return. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk, and I'll see you soon.